Hi everyone, this is Quotidian Light, and this is a stretched lobe video. This video is the result of a question that I received last week regarding thinning lobes. This person has thinning in a particular part of their lobe, and they wanted to know if there was anything they could do to thicken it up. And that made me realize that it would probably be a good idea to do a whole video just on what thinning is, why do earlobes thin, and what you can do to prevent it. So first, I should probably talk about what causes thinning. There are a couple of things that are really common here in the US that cause thinning that you don't necessarily see in other countries. So one of the common things that piercers and people will tell you if you have stretched lobes is don't wear ear weights. But then if you go to these other countries, you'll find people with huge ear weights hanging off their lobes and their ears aren't thinning. So why are our ears thinning? In my opinion, it's most likely because of two reasons. One, they start really young. They start much younger than we do. And B, most of us have messed up initial piercings. So unless you went into a piercing salon and told them you were planning on stretching your ears were not pierced in the same way that someone from one of those societies gets their ears pierced. If you go to the Maasai, if you're in Borneo, if you're in the Chinese hill tribes, they do not pierce their ears the same way that we do. And in my opinion, that is like the biggest difference that can cause issues later on down the line, because your ears may look even, they may look fine, but after a certain point, if your earring hole is too far down or too far over, once you get to a certain size, you'll start to see it, and you may think your ear is thinning when actually what it is the hole was closer to one side than the other. It really wasn't centered. So that's one of the first things that can cause thinning. Both the appearance of thinning and actual thinning is just where the hole is placed. If it's too close to one of the edges, it can either look like it's thinning, or that can actually cause thinning because then the pressure on the hole isn't equal. Another thing that can cause thinning would be injury. So one of my big things is, people get in fist fights, they get their ears punched. People dye their hair, they don't cover their ears, and bleach gets on their ear skin. The skin on our ears is really delicate, and you need to take really good care of your ears. If you get an infection, anything at all, that can actually cause thinning later on down the line. Going along with that would be the cold. So this is something that I don't really deal with because I'm on the West Coast, but even on the West Coast, there are times like during like a big storm, like usually we get like one or two really big storms, and a lot of times during that time period, if I'm wearing stone or metal, my ears get really cold. And what I will normally do is I will take my ears out on those days. But if you're living somewhere where every day is like that, you really can't do that. And so changing the type of jewelry you wear and protecting your ears can go a long way to preventing injury to that skin. And if you do get injury to that skin, even if it doesn't rise to the level of frostbite, you can get thinning ears. The last thing that I can think of off the top of my head that really causes thinning ears is stretching too fast. Your ear may look fine. It may not be fussy. It may not have blowouts. Your ear can look totally healthy. But if you are stretching at a faster rate than what your skin can rebuild, because remember, as you're stretching, it's like building a muscle. You work out, you get microscopic tears in the muscle. As the muscle heals larger. You're kind of doing something similar to your ears. But if you stretch too fast, what happens if you stretch your skin too fast? Stretch marks. If you've ever seen somebody with stretch marks, the area of the skin that stretched too quickly is very, very thin and delicate, and it's easy to tear that skin. So stretching too fast to the point where your skin, even if it's just, it looks fine, you don't see any marking, you don't think you have any issues, 5, 6, 7 years down the line, you may find that your ear is thinning because over time, this tissue didn't have enough time to rebuild before it was torn again. That is all preventable, in my opinion. The biggest thing that I think people should do before they start stretching, like the number one thing I tell people, is get your initial piercing checked out for placement. If you look in the mirror and they look centered, you don't have necessarily the same ability to judge that as someone who has a lot of experience with piercings and stretched holes. So going to a good piercer and having them assess your lobes to see, are they centered? Do you have enough tissue on the bottom? Does it look like when you stretch, you're going to have equal pressure around the hole? If you don't, your ear may need to be, you may need to take the earring out, let it close up and re-pierce it. You may need to dermal punch out, scar tissue. You may need to have your earlobe scalpeled. All those things can help correct for placement, but I do recommend getting that checked before you start, because after you are an inch, getting that corrected is a lot more difficult. The other thing I would say is protect your ears, both from chemicals and from weather. Everybody talks about weather. They say this typical, don't wear metal, stone during the winter because it can get cold and you can cause frostbite to your ears. And because there's lower blood circulation, you may not even notice until it's too late. Most people recommend like wood during the winter because it holds, body heat a little bit better, and it doesn't make your ears cold. There are other things that people recommend. I just can't think of them off the top of my head. Some people recommend glass. I personally love glass, but when it's really cold, it has to be like a glass plug, because a glass eyelet, that cold just gets right in that hole, and it's too cold for me. The other thing that I see a lot of people wear are like little socks or like ear mittens. You can get those on Etsy. I checked out a couple places on Etsy that are selling them, and they look really cute. If you knit or crochet, you could probably come up with something similar. But you know what? You don't necessarily have to go out and put something specifically over your ears. Wearing a turtleneck turned up, wearing a hoodie with the hood up, wearing scarves around your neck that come up and cover your ears, wearing earmuffs, all those things can help keep your ears warm. And if you are someplace and it's suddenly cold and you weren't prepared, it can be as simple as taking out your plug and tucking your earlobe if it's large enough. And even that can help keep your ear warm to prevent the damage. The one thing I don't hear people talking about is protecting your ear if you're doing any kind of chemical process for your hair. I do this when I dye my hair, and I'm going to be bleaching my hair next year. Every time I dye my hair, I do the usual thing with, with the lotion or, petroleum jelly around the edges. But that's not enough to protect my ears. The skin is really, really delicate, and I don't want to get bleach on my ears. So what I have is, you can go down to Sally's, and I'll also put an affiliate link in the down bar for Amazon. It doesn't cost you anything, but every cent counts. They're little, you get like a package of these little, they look like shrunken down shower caps for like a Barbie, and they fit right over your ear. And that's what I wear when I bleach my hair. And that way, none of those chemicals are getting on my ear skin. I think that's really important. Also, personally, I think after a certain size, wearing heavy jewelry at night can cause damage, because when you're sleeping, it's tweaked backwards. Like if you're sleeping on your back, your ears are going at an odd angle. And so unless you're sleeping on your side, it can tweak your ears, in my opinion. I find that when I take my earrings out at night, or if I wear really lightweight earrings, my ears are a lot happier and less irritated the next day. So let me see. The next thing that I want to talk about is how to stop acute thinning. So how do you stop acute thinning? When I'm talking about acute thinning, I'm not talking about thinning that's showing up over time. I'm talking about you wake up and your ears look different. They look irritated. Something's wrong. That's probably the easiest thing to remedy, because if you can catch thinning fast enough, sometimes it can reverse itself. So sometimes I see people that get infected ears and they talk about, doing sea salt soaks and waiting and seeing what's going to happen. But sometimes by the time you see that it's a problem, it's too late. So if you see pus, if your ears have like the blood vessels are like really bright in the earlobe, if your ears are extremely painful, I actually suggest not home treating that infection. If you realize that you actually have a skin infection, I do recommend getting to a doctor and getting antibiotics, because your earlobe can go from looking irritated to being split in two within a matter of 2 days. I've personally seen photos of people that have had like staph infections in their earlobe and their ear split like overnight. So if you think you have an earlobe infection, go to a doctor and get medication to nip that infection in the bud, because if you try to self-treat it, over time you may end up with thinning earlobes. If you don't necessarily have an infection, but your ears are just irritated, or you're noticing that your earlobe used to be, level with the flare on the plug, and suddenly there's like a little dip, then go ahead and downsize your ears and do sea salt soaks, do like oil rubs, and just give your ears some time. If you caught it while it was still occurring, sometimes your earlobe can rebuild itself. Sometimes not, though. It's just a matter of what your skin is capable of doing. If you nip it in the bud while there's a lot of blood circulation stuff going on in there, sometimes it can go ahead and, reverse itself naturally. Now, if you didn't notice it right away, or it wasn't the result of something acute, then what can you do? You're noticing over time your earlobes look thin. You've tried, downsizing. It didn't really do anything because it wasn't an acute infection. So you went ahead and stretched back up. It still looks thin in a spot. If that thinning has already settled in, there really isn't anything that you can do to make the entire lobe even. Now, through proper care, you can start to thicken up the entire lobe, but that spot that is thinner than the rest of the lobe will thicken, but it will never be as thick as the other parts of the lobe. I hope that makes sense. So if that is happening to you, you just overall need to thicken your lobes. It looks thinner all around. I suggest slowing down, and periodically as you're stretching, going back down and then going back up, staying at a size for a while, going up and then going down. Varying your sizes over time can really stimulate your ears to grow, for lack of a better word. It's not so much that your ear is technically growing, but you are developing more tissue. If you look at someone's earlobes and they're like 4 inches or 3 inches, they actually have more lobe than what they started out with. And so what you want to do is stimulate that. You want to stimulate that growth. And one way to do that is to slow down, is to stay at certain sizes periodically, to downsize periodically, and to have proper care, to not do things that will thin out your lobes, like having a bad initial piercing, stretching too fast, not taking care of your ears when the weather is bad, but also sleeping with your plugs out once they are large enough that they don't shrink down overnight, in my opinion, is a really good thing for a couple reasons. One, you're less likely to tweak your lobes in the middle of the night, but also it allows the air to circulate. One thing that is known to break down skin that a lot of people don't talk about, and I actually had a conversation with somebody where they were like, you shouldn't sleep with your plugs out. If you know anything about medicine, having your skin constantly wet breaks down your skin. So people that are overweight that have folds, a lot of times they'll get infections in the folds. Some people get infections in their belly buttons. Even if they don't have an infection in their belly button may actually stink. If people don't dry behind their ears, they may find that they get rashes and irritation behind their ear. Well, a lot of people, when they get out of the shower and their ears are still wet, they just slap some oil on their ears and stick their plugs in. So their ears, the inside of the fistula, isn't actually getting circulation and drying out like the skin on your arm or the skin on your face will. So for me, sleeping without my plugs in allows the air to circulate through the hole and helps keep the skin healthy. If you can't sleep with your plugs out because your ears shrink up overnight, having your plugs out for a couple hours during the day works just as well. Making sure that you dry your lobes before you oil them also is really important to me, because that allows the skin to just in general be healthier. The oil rubs, using like things like vitamin E, bio oil, castor oil, all those things are very helpful for keeping the skin healthy. Also making sure that you're washing your plugs regularly, or if you get an abrasion or a pimple on your earlobe, that you're not picking at it. Those are all things that will go to keeping your earlobes healthy. If the thinning is in one particular area though, and it is significant, I do recommend talking to a piercer, because sometimes what they can do is, while you're not going to be able to just thicken that one spot, sometimes they can scalpel your ear and start to redirect some of that pressure, so that when you're stretching, all the pressure isn't coming down on that thin part, it's going on a thicker part. And I think that is really helpful. One other thing that I would recommend is, if you have a thin part in one particular area and you've downsized, you've gone up and down, you're doing massage, it's healing, but it's never gonna be as thick as in other areas of your ear, is if you're using tape to go up sizes, where the tape overlaps and you have that sharp edge, make sure that that sharp edge doesn't settle on the thin spot, because that causes irritation. You don't want to rotate that sharp edge over that thin spot. You don't want it sitting on that thin spot. You want to make sure that the sharp edge of the tape goes someplace where it's nice and thick, or that you stop using tape entirely. What I mean stop using tape, go see the latest video that PangeaPiercing did about, just wearing plugs over time will make your ears stretch on their own. And if you're having any kind of issues with your ears, then not forcing it and allowing your ears to stretch naturally is probably one of the best things you can do for your ears. So that's what I've got on thickening up your lobes. I hope it helps, and ciao.